Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Manhattan Project busted out of its shell and onto your NES back in 1991. Developed and published by Konami, The Manhattan Project is the follow-up to the hugely successful Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, and was unfortunately the final Turtles game to be released on the NES. Besides apparently going for the world record for having the most syllables in a game title, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Manhattan Project is obviously not trying to do much more than just be a solid follow-up to the already popular arcade game. Long gone are the dark days of the original NES Turtles game that physically and mentally scarred kids everywhere, and now in its place is the tried and true beat-em-up formula that defined the best Turtles games. All this sounds like a home run, with the only issue being that Konami was releasing the Manhattan Project in December of 1991, which was a full year after the Super NES had already been released, leaving approximately 14 or so kids even caring about anything that was still releasing on the now tired and totally uncool NES. But even so, was the Manhattan Project a worthy send-off to the popular franchise on the NES? Or was this a case of Konami just trying to make a few more bucks before the highly anticipated Turtles in Time hit the Super NES? Well, grab your favorite green body paint and slather yourself in it until someone forcibly makes you stop, because we're about to see if the Manhattan Project will make you love being a turtle all over again. Start the game up and you'll immediately be tossed into a screen to select your favorite mutated turtle, and then afterward you're treated to a plot that could have easily been ripped out of any episode of the Turtles cartoon. Apparently the Turtles have decided to take a vacation down to Florida for a bit of relaxation, only to have their vacation interrupted by Shredder himself, who then hilariously rips the entire island of Manhattan off of the face of the earth and just kind of hovers it into the air for reasons, I guess. But the theft of an entire city and the possible deaths of thousands of innocent people takes a backseat as soon as Shredder reveals that he's also kidnapped everyone's favorite news reporter, April O'Neil. So the Turtles jump into action to take Shredder down to rescue their hot friend and maybe just save Manhattan as well. This means it's time for you, the player, to take the controller out of your mouth and get ready to save the day once again with maybe just a little bit of turtle power. Actually playing the game is all about making your turtle of choice beat the living hell out of things, and it's about as easy as you could imagine, with the A button used for jumping around and the B button there to dish out a flurry of attacks at any foot soldier dumb enough to get in your way. The Turtles can also combine the two for a jumping attack, which is honestly the attack you should get used to using the most, especially around bosses, but more on that later. All this should feel pretty familiar to anyone that played the original Turtles arcade game on the NES, but this time around the action feels a bit tighter, since it seems enemy hitboxes are more forgiving. This means you'll be spending less time flailing away at the air if you happen to not be standing exactly in front of an enemy. Also, unlike the first game, each turtle now has their own special attack that can be activated by pressing the A and B buttons at the same time, which then unleashes a powerful attack that can take out most enemies in one hit, but at the same time also takes a chunk of your health every time you use it. And much like every other game that does this type of thing, I generally never use it, since you'll need all the health you can get just to make it through the individual stages. Speaking of stages, the Manhattan Project comes with a nice selection of 8 stages to work through, with several having multiple sections. The variety of scenes ain't bad either, as you'll start off on the beaches of Key West, do some surfing along the coast, fight through the streets and sewers of Manhattan, and finally, of course, making it to the Technodrome for the game's final levels. While this may initially seem like a shorter game than the previous NES Turtles game, I think the variety and pacing in the Manhattan Project is much better. Let's just go ahead and admit that as much as we loved the arcade game on the NES, things definitely got tedious after a while. The Manhattan Project mostly solves this by having a lot more variety in both stage and enemy types throughout. Yes, it can still get a bit tiring fighting foot soldiers over and over, but nowhere near the sleep-inducing mile-long levels of Turtles 2. The Foot Clan will of course be populating every one of those levels, including several new fun variations, like these assholes that use the ancient martial arts technique of throwing sand in your face, along with your standard ninja star throwing and sword-wielding foot soldiers of previous games. While most of these enemies are nothing more than fodder to beat your way through, it's the bosses that are once again here to be the true wall of difficulty in progressing through the game, as they're every bit the maddening cheap bastards they were in the arcade game, if not more so. Their constant, hard-to-avoid attacks and near impossible task of getting close for a few hits before they kick you back across the screen means you'll have to resort to constant quick jump attacks just to get a hit in, or just hope that they do their one attack that leaves them vulnerable for like 2 whole seconds. And even if you do get a decent amount of attacks in, these assholes can take a beating, so get ready for every boss fight to feel more like an overly long battle of attrition than anything else. The bosses are actually really my only complaint in the game in general, with them regularly making a fun, breezy beat 'em up feel like a chore every time they show up. up. Thankfully, the rest of the game and its awesome gameplay and charm more than make up for these bosses being an outright crime. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Manhattan Project is a game that would have been one of my absolute favorites on the NES if it had just come out a bit earlier than it did. Unfortunately, by the time the Manhattan Project released in December of '91, I was well entrenched into whatever was coming out on the Super NES. Hell, I already gave my NES to my cousin, since why would anyone need such a thing when the almighty Super NES had 8 whole games on it at that point? Sadly, the side effect of my dumb kid brain was that I missed out on a lot of great games released late in the NES's lifespan, and the Manhattan Project just happened to be one of them, which sucks because this is a really great Turtles game. I could easily see myself sitting and playing this for hours if I'd rented it as a kid, but alas, that wasn't the case, and I didn't actually play it until I was figuring out how awesome emulation was many years later. So maybe don't make the same mistake I did, and if you're a fan of the Turtles, or even beat-em-ups in general, then check out the Manhattan Project as soon as you get the chance. It's easily one of the best brawlers on the system, and without a doubt, the best Turtles game on there as well.